So, you know, what does it mean to me to have some type of ceremony or ritual instilled for the transition of our youth? Every most of the times when we study history, we'll find that many indigenous cultures and indigenous people had what we would call rites of passage. These rites of passage would basically prepare the young man or the young woman for adulthood. They would be given tools and and resources that would allow them to properly make the transition. But before they make the transition, there were ceremonies or rituals that they would undergo to make sure that they are prepared and ready to make that transition. And this was called rites of passage. See, a rite is simply just a ceremony. And the thing is that within our communities, we are missing that piece. We are missing the rites of passage piece. I mean, you have people in pocket locations and so on and so forth that are doing, rituals, rites of passage rituals, but doing it on a small scale. You understand? And I admire and give them the credit and the kudos for even putting together a rites of passage for their community. You understand? Because we need to do the same thing. We need to sit down and put together a collective rites of passage for our young brothers and young sisters. You know what I mean? So they can make that transition properly into the adult world, knowing that they have the resources and the tools to become an adult. See, most of the times what people don't get is that adulthood in indigenous cultures and cultures that maintain their traditions start at the age of 13. 12 is the transition into adulthood. 13 is, quote unquote, you are technically an adult. You are now responsible for your own ways and your own actions. So therefore you should have certain tools. Now the thing is that with traditional rites of passage, you have elders who set the standards and so on and so forth, and who teach the manifests of how to properly move through this rite. They give you the tools and so on and so forth. They sit down with you and they teach you certain things, and from mouth to ear, things that are just taught in that ceremony, things that aren't shared with after that ceremony is done, so on and so forth, because the ceremony is an initiation into your own self, into your adulthood. You understand? So therefore, we need to begin to reinstill the idea of cultural rites and cultural passages of, cultural rites and passages, because it's very important. And what happens is that it reinstills, our identity principles and so on and so forth. Now, what happens is that we get a lot of kids, who do go through rites of passages, but they go through the rites of passages from the block. You understand? And that rite of passage is coming from their own peers. And a lot of times the family structure, because of the way it is at certain times, and because the love isn't in the home, sometimes, the kids walk outside and they find love outside, or what they can, misconstrue as love. And that's how the gang thing works, because the gang is love. But in the same process, the gang ideology also is a rite of passage, or just the being outside is a rite of passage. You know what I mean? And what I mean by that is the introduction to the 40 ounce, to the blunt. How to roll a blunt, how to drink, how to bust off. Those are all considered rites of passages in our community. And you know what I mean? But these are rites of passage right into incarceration or right into death. You understand? So these rites of passages are leading you into a finite end quickly. You know what I'm saying? It's leading you to an end. So we have to not allow these types of rites of passages. You have to teach your children that their peers cannot give them certain information, because they're peers just like them. How do you get guidance from a 14-year-old when you're 14? You understand what I mean? He doesn't know nothing and you don't know nothing. You're still growing. You're still learning. You're still developing. So the rites of passage is built on us as the adults. We must find the component and create a component that's healthy and conducive to aid our youngsters in making that transition. When you look at the Jews and the bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah and so on and so forth, you see at the age of 12, they are transferring them over into adulthood by the age of 13. Now, that's how it works. When you look at traditions in Africa, the Hausa and the Dinkas and so on and so forth, they have rites of passage. They send the young men out into the bush. You understand? So, and when they come, they have to do it. They have to be a man out in that bush. You understand? So it's kind of the same thing. We are teaching our youngsters how to be men, but we are transitioning them through a rite, through a ceremony. And in this ceremony, it contains all the components that would make this individual or individuals understand what manhood means. And manhood does not mean what we have been socialized to think that it means in this condition and in this society. Manhood, does not mean that you're tough and you're rough and you're strong and you know what I'm saying? Manhood means that basically you are true to yourself. You are true to your own development. See, a man can cry. We are taught that men can't cry. But you know what? Men have emotions. And sometimes men are much more sensitive than women, but men aren't in touch with that because they think it's weak and they think it's whack and so on and so forth. But through a ceremony and a rite of passage, man knows that his vehicle is a balance, that he has the masculine and the feminine principle within him. And when I say masculine and feminine, I'm not talking gender. You understand what I'm saying? I'm talking vibration and frequencies. You know what I mean? So we have the magnetic and we have the electric in us. You understand? So when a man can share his emotions and do that in an open way, that's a man. You know what I'm saying? That's one who's not afraid to share his own self in such a way or to heal his own self in such a way. So with that, the rite of passages, is a very important thing. You know what I'm saying? So that's something that we need to examine as people a lot more and see what we can do about that and create some type of component that will allow us to make this transition for our youth. Peace.